Don't worry. Okay, so with me today, I've got Royce Wiggins. Not going to give you too much of an intro, but Royce is a former player and Welsh international who I know from the days at Charlton. So thought I'd bring Royce on for a discussion about where he's going with his career now, maybe his alternative career. Royce, I won't steal your thunder, mate. Do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, played in a range of leagues, League Two all the way up to Premiership. Didn't quite get on the field and in the Premiership, but sat on the bench a couple of times. But yeah, played sort of League Two, League One, Championship. Had some good spells, some bad spells, a lot of injuries, and a few games.
And it was, of course, injury that led you to retire quite recently, really.
Yeah, I did the injury just before my 29th birthday. So should have been the prime of your career, really. But yeah, picked up quite a bad injury then. Spent a couple of years trying to sort of rehab and get back to where I was, but just never really got started with it, to be honest. It was a bit of a journey. Never even got up back to running. It just wasn't allowing me to do so. If you want to know about it, I did my ACL, my cruciate, lateral ligament, hamstring tendon, didn't avulse off the bone. It snapped the fibula, biceps femoris. Yeah, it snapped that area, and then I did the popliteus tendon as well around the back. So tendon didn't actually snap, but just pulled off the bone.
Yeah, it was horrendous. I remember watching it, and I think we were just saying that just before we came on. Like, I remember I'd actually just played a game for the veterans myself, and I was watching your game. I think it was Birmingham versus
the big derby, Villa.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Villa, yeah. So
Yeah.
a good game to be involved in. The atmosphere was incredible. So if you're going to go out, I suppose it's a good one to go out.
Nice. I felt for you, mate. And it's do you know what? Like, a lot of players I've worked with and I've seen them get injuries. It's never nice to see, and the severity of your injury. I know we spoke a good bit while you were going through your rehab, and it's not an easy thing, and probably not an easy thing to decide to call it a day and retire. It's a tough thing for any player.
I mean, I think like anyone, I was trying to sort of cling on to it and trying to delay it. But I think ultimately it had its days, run its course. It wasn't going to allow me to come back from it. Just a bit more detail about it, and just sort of the complications that I had involved because of the hamstring tendon. Once I had the operation, I was in a fixed brace for 12 weeks, so I couldn't bend it. Had to keep it dead straight. So then once I come out of the brace, I probably had about sort of 30 degrees flexion and just couldn't get past it. Everything I did, it just wasn't moving. It was locked. So I went back under anaesthetic and had manipulation done. So they put me under, manipulated it, cracked it, come back from there. And then had really good flexion, but just couldn't straighten it. I couldn't sort of just fixed at that sort of 10 degrees and couldn't sort of extend it any. Was trying to work away at that. And then in the end, found out that my fat pad was really inflamed. So I had to go in again for a third operation, have that sort of shaved down and sort of removed and sort of settled down. So I think I was 1 year in and I hadn't done sort of any real sort of walk-in or resistance work through it. It was quite a long process just getting the ball rolling to start with.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It's obviously I've had quite a few injuries as well, and I think there's a lot of thing that goes on in your mind during that time. And the biggest thing for any player is, when am I going to get back, and how am I going to get back, and sometimes the frustration of what's this actually doing, and where are we going, and people like me coming in and having a chat with you, and trying to get a plan together, and I know that obviously Eddie Howe was at Bournemouth when we spoke there, was quite hard in training, and probably getting back to that level was always in the back of your mind, but you've moved on to a different path now, and which again something we spoke about a lot recently. You've actually completed the course that I'm going through at the moment, which is the IOPN Diploma in Performance Nutrition. So, how did that come about, and how did you gain the interest in nutrition?
It's a tough one because I spent a lot of my career picking up injury after injury. I mean, from the age of 17, I think I did my cruciate in the other leg. And just every injury I picked up throughout my career, that the recovery for me just seemed to just extend beyond the average, what the average person was. So if I did my cruciate, I was going to take sort of 12 months, whereas people were coming back in 6 months. If I had a soft tissue tear, I was coming back, 8 weeks rather than 6 weeks. It would just always seem to be that little bit extra. And then throughout my career, I think always did the correct stuff at the training ground. So the resistance work, the rehab, the fitness on the pitch, the attitude. But I think now understanding nutrition, I think that's probably where a lot of it lied. So I think I looked at the different aspect of it and just tried to sort of educate myself in that field to find out a little bit more, I suppose.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think one of the things that I see in injury is body composition. So it's a completely different way of eating, than when you're playing, which makes sense, but doesn't make sense to a lot of people. Because the last thing you want when someone's got a longer term injury is excessive weight gain, because arguably that's going to take you even longer to get back. I know I used to see you floating about the gym all the time, especially when you lost your dog that time. I still remember that. But now, how important do you think things like, if you were to look back at your career and look at the things like resistance training and nutrition, how much of an impact do you think that would have had on your career if you kind of knew what you know now?
A big difference. I mean, just the simple things from straight after the operation and just sort of getting that protein feed correct. I mean, I was going for long periods of time without sort of eating, which, you know what it's like. I mean, after an operation, the last thing on your mind is like you just want them sort of comfort foods. But I mean, you've got to sort of plan it as if you would sort of a resistance program or a training period and stuff. There's certain things that you can do to manipulate the situation and just speed up your recovery. Going back to body composition, I mean, I was always one of the leanest in the side, but it didn't necessarily mean that I was fueling properly or recovering adequately. So, I mean, I could have gone. I always suffered really badly looking back with a suppressed appetite after games and after intense periods of training, which then would lead me to not eat straight after or straight away. And these things weren't really being picked up on. Now I look back, they weren't. I mean, we had the fitness sports scientists and stuff that were there, but not necessarily educated in that side of things as well. Know a little bit, but not. They're just not paid to look out for them sort of things as well. And I think it's a new area where football's sort of slow to pick up on, really. I mean, we still don't have full-time nutritionists all the time in England. I think that's a sort of an area that can be improved massively.
Yeah, I think you touched on education there. I think that's a massive point with players. Again, every player has different demands, different needs, positionally as well as personally. There's also culturally as well. I've worked with players who avoid certain food groups due to religion or culture or their beliefs. So all those things need to be factored in. I think what you're saying is right. I would argue that the first 48 hours after a game are absolutely crucial. Generally, in England or the UK, it might be the day off after the game. That has changed slightly with sort of tactical periodization and those models that have come in. But the day after a game, you probably don't feel like refueling and eating. So they're critical times, probably up in that 48, 72 hours after a game are critical. Then you've got, if in the Championship, League One, League Two, where you're going to play 2 games a week, and then you get caught in a cycle, which is hard to break because everyone has different habits and ideas. So I think education is vital.
Yeah, I mean, because looking back on the career, I got probably mixed up with being healthy and eating healthy. So loading the plate with greens and sort of fruits and veg and stuff, which is fine. But I mean, them periods just before the game, say Friday or Thursday evening, when you got to start loading and stuff, I was probably not having enough to really saturate them stores, the glycogen stores before a game.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I was at one club where we had the nutritionist come in, and he was taking sort of, you put your hand on this gadget and it would give you a reading of how many fruit and veg you've been eating. So that takes a read of the pigment going through or something, gives you a score. But then, of course, what happens then in football is everyone wants to win and look good on the leaderboard. So and then I see people sort of compensating where they might have sort of your pastas and rice instead, and loading the plate with fruit and veg and leafy greens. And then, probably not fueling adequately before training sessions or games. And just them simple little things can really play on your mind and have a sort of leading effect going into games and training sessions.
That's interesting. I think the other side of that would be that there are days when you're not going to do as much out on the training pitch, and there are days where you don't need to fuel as much. And I've certainly seen that with players I've worked with. They continue eating every day like it's a match day -1, and then that can be a problem. So there's sort of it's a really fine line, especially with the nature of football in a training week. It's very up and down. You'll have a higher day and a lower day, and probably you're only going to have maybe one hard day within a training week, depending on games. So getting that balance is difficult, and knowing what to eat and how to eat. And I've seen players who want to avoid carbohydrate because they want to look good. As you mentioned, the leaderboard there, and actually that's your main source of fuel. And they are conversations that have come up for myself with players. No, you need to take this on board, and then again, it's what's the right type of fuel? When are you going to take that in? And it's interesting, and as you say, it's growing in football. How's that led you to sort of where you are now? If you want to just touch on what you're doing now since retirement.
Yeah. Funny to say, I've just had a conditional offer to study for my master's at Oxford Brookes. So
Brilliant.
That's
brilliant, mate.
The next stage going forward. I've actually done a bit with Errol, the old physio at Charlton, who's got his own practice now in Kensington, and just been trying to get some experience that way. Just trying to look at clients, and I think not too much with elite sport at the minute until I get that masters and the SENR register. I don't think I'll be touching too much on football clubs and football side of things. So I've just been trying to keep busy that way. I've been learning a lot to do with Keith Barr and his injury prevention. So I've been looking at a lot of ways to recover quicker from injuries. A big passion of mine is to try and help and educate the players that are injured, and sometimes in football that just gets pushed to the side, depending on what club you looked at. But looking at, I mean, as soon as you're injured, you're not much use to the staff, and unfortunately, a lot of players just get pushed to the side and forgotten about. And that's where I'd like to come in and sort of educate them on how best to recover in the quickest way possible.
Yeah, definitely, mate. I think when it comes to injury and long-term injury, I've maybe fell down a little bit in my career with that as well, because there's so much other stuff going on. But I think it's arguably more important to work with those players as a team, a multidisciplinary team: sports science, physiotherapy, S&C, nutrition, psychology. I think psychology of injury is one that may be neglected these days, where we can get better at it. And I think there's got to be, I always think that lack of clarity leads to frustration. So if a player doesn't have that clear path, and I think we mentioned it earlier, that when you get injured, your nutrition will change. How you work that on a daily basis, that's going to change massively because of you're not doing as much. And gradually that phased approach of a rehab and a return to play, all these little inputs are vital for the player without overloading them with too much information.
Yeah. I mean, the best way to do it, well, thinking back to me, I had the operation and I spent quite a long time sort of in the hospital. So, I mean, I was on the electrical stimulant, then sort of stimulating the muscles and stuff, not feeding adequately. Then probably a week after 10 days, they had me straight in the gym doing upper body circuit, where I was sort of hopping around on one leg to get to each station. And I mean, unless you're gonna fuel that session and sort of have adequate protein and fuel it with carbs to get yourself around, I mean, I'd argue sort of what's the point of doing it in the first place? So I mean, I was doing this program, probably appetite sort of suppressed and a bit down in the dumps, where I'm not really thinking about too much, and yet had sort of no one looking at that side of things to really maximise the adaptations that I was trying to get in the gym. So I mean, even sort of blood flow restriction and trying to sort of build the muscle back up straight away. And then now I would argue the fact that what was the point if I sort of go say 24 hours without properly stimulating the muscle protein synthetic rate? So
yeah, and that's it. It's just going through the motions, isn't it? It's just going to work and not knocking anyone anywhere where you've been before. But that's sometimes where, and I get that with injured players, and it's frustrating for them. And I've seen players that have had a really horrendous injury history for whatever reason, and those frustrations come out. And being clear with those players that this is your pathway, this is where we're going to go. But I think it's not just physical. I think there's so many more different inputs, like the nutritional and the psychological side of it, of being able to say, okay, this is the path for you, this is where we need you to be. And they all tie in. Like you're saying about nutrition, a little bit down in the dumps, not fueling yourself for these sessions. Yeah. It's incredibly frustrating for players, and areas I think we, as practitioners, we need to get better at.
Yeah, I mean, just trust the players as well. I mean, if I had someone to sit down with, call me into a meeting and sort of 5 minutes, say 5 minutes maximum, I'm going to explain to you why we were doing this session and what we're trying to get out of it. So sometimes I was training the unilateral limb, the good leg, because there can be a crossover effect. I mean, when I was playing, I wouldn't have believed you if you told me that sort of thing can happen. But if someone was there to sit me down and show me and trust me to take in the knowledge, then I would have gone into them sessions thinking a lot better off. Sometimes with players, you think that they're just putting you through it because they can, like just to give you something to do. Whereas you think, I could be at home now, but they're just getting me in because they're paying me or whatever. But there's an actual process and a reason behind it. Yeah. Whereas I don't think that that communication between player and staff is always there. I think sometimes the player feels, like you say, a bit down in the dumps and don't really want to be there. And then they also feel that they're just being brought in because they're getting paid to do so, and there is an actual benefit for it.
Yeah. I think it's like yours was obviously extremely long term, and they're the hardest ones sometimes as a practitioner to deal with, because something as complex as the injury that you had, there's no straight. So a broken leg, you can think, right, okay, let's just say 6 weeks, we'll do that rehab. You won't have lost too much from the playing demands, but you're still going to have to go through that process to get you back and reach the playing demands of where you were, get you back on that pitch. Whereas something as complex as yours there's no real I mean, I don't think we should ever really put timelines on things anyway. I know I just did there, but that was for demonstration purposes, because it can sometimes give that false, maybe that little bit of false hope. So I think we have to be careful with that. But when you've got something that's as complex as that, with a lot of different influencing factors in your recovery, regeneration, and getting you back on, eventually getting back, it's very difficult to do that. And I think the player is central to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I never, like you said, because it was quite complex and no one really sort of knew how I was going to react to the operation and stuff. I mean, the surgeon said to me straight away, it's going to be tough. It's going to be touch and go. So I sort of knew there and then. Didn't quite believe it when he said it, but I knew it was going to be, or it was a bit more than just a cruciate type thing straight away. And then we never really set any time frames for it. What we did is we drew up a plan and just sort of had a tick sheet. So once we completed one, tick it off, and before you can obviously step back into training, the goal sheet had to be all completed. So you had each stage sort of mapped out then. So once I completed, say, a squat, I can go on to the next one, load it, then I can go on to some plyometrics and things. So we just did it as a sort of progression that way. Then you could see what the next goal was as well. So you could really focus on, right, now I've got to achieve that one, got to do that one, got to do that one. And you can just sort of go through it like that, rather than saying I should be able to squat at 6 weeks when it's not quite like that. The next phase after squatting might have come quicker than, say, squatting did originally. So you might just then, once you get over one hurdle, you might just go bang, 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 then have a stumbling block. So I think it is better to just tick them off as you go.
Yeah, it's definitely not linear. There's, probably one of the hardest challenges for me as a practitioner is if a player breaks down during the rehab, or there's always that risk reward, isn't there? Because I have a belief at some point you are going to have to push that player, but it's making that call as to when that needs to be done. And, we can look at all the data that we have and try and make informed choices, and the physios will influence that, and the SSC, and but at some point it needs to be done. And probably one of the most difficult things is when a player breaks down, because they're going to want to know why. We're going to want to know why. And sometimes that question can't be answered. It's a tough process.
For a player, the hardest part is always when you're locked away in the gym and you've got to do all the sort of the gritty work there to try and build it back up. I mean, once a player sort of puts the boots on and sort of steps back on the field, I think then it sort of becomes a little bit easier. Well, it always did, sort of, for me, mentally, to be out on the field and sort of amongst other players, even if they were training opposite. At least you sort of still feel a part of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, the initial phase of when you're in the gym, and I mean, especially if you're the only player at that time injured, you're in the gym on your own. I mean, that's when it's a real sort of it can get really sort of mentally drained, and
soul destroying, I think. And those players are still an integral part of the squad, and we shouldn't forget those players. I think also in that rehab process where it goes from that really controlled, and then some point it becomes a little bit more chaotic, and we've got to get them integrated into games. And maybe in my day, it was like, just put them back in. And it was like, well, no. Now looking back on that, I'm like, well, I didn't have that as a player. It was just get back out there. It wasn't even rehab, and certainly not, nutritional and sports science. It was just like, go and do it. And which is probably, if I talk about myself, is probably left, my hips and everything in a bad way, because rehab was so poor, and, it didn't exist. It basically didn't exist. Whereas today, I think we're a lot better at that, but I still think we can get better. And as you've already identified there with, actually being open with players and the nutritional side of it, and how we can feed them that information and give them clear pathways of where someone's at. What does the future hold for you now? I know you said about your masters, but what are you actually up to now?
Well, just to go back on that there, we're sort of educating the players and letting them go. I mean, just the simple things like the collagen shots and stuff. I mean, we had them placed out on before breakfast and just on the side. And I mean, if you don't know what they do or why you're having them, you're less likely to pick them up.
Yeah.
I could go through the whole sort of rehab, and no one's told me what they're there for, what they do. And I mean, just a simple sort of 5-minute brief talk just
Yeah.
amongst the players and stuff. I mean, that could just make a huge difference to whether I'm going to pick up the supplement or the meal.
Yeah.
It can be so simple, but yet we just seem to complicate everything.
No, you're right, and it's something that, again, I've tried to improve on myself, but it's something where it becomes easy, actually. So I think someone once said to me that when you talk about recovery, it's sometimes seen that, oh, let's just do a recovery session because that's the easy thing to do. Those players may not need recovery, but it's, oh, let's just do a recovery session because that's the easy thing to do. So by just putting something like the collagen shot down, that's the easy thing to do. But again, if you don't understand that, why am I doing this? And again, that builds frustration. I think you have to be open and transparent with players. And as an example, in our recent tournament, we created a recovery protocol where each day there was a different theme. We tried to make it fun. We nicked the unicorns off the England team for our pool sessions, but you try and create an environment of recovery where the players understand as much as possible as to why they're doing something. I think compliance will be better. It's like the infamous wellness questionnaires. Just putting that in front of someone doesn't actually mean much.
Yeah.
But when you can see why we're looking at that and how that's important, then I think it's better for the player and practitioner.
Yeah, definitely. It frustrates me now looking back, because you do the RPE scale, for example, and we do it on the training pitch, and the one player hears a certain number, and then you're guaranteed to hear that number throughout the session.
Yeah.
Or if a player doesn't, it's sort of a if a player, you catch 22 here as well, because if you know what it means, then, and the player doesn't particularly want to work hard, he's going to score it harder than what the actual session was.
Yeah.
So it's a catch-22. It's quite hard to sort of balance
Yeah,
it.
and interestingly, I think anecdotally, although some people probably agree with me here, some may disagree, but players tend to remember the last thing that they did. So if that was hard, it's going to make it harder. And I think you could, if you wanted to, take an RPE after every drill, but that's incredibly time consuming. A player, you're interrupting a session for that. So I think the subjective data needs to be married up with the objective data, because I've seen it where it's rated a 9 and you look at the GPS outputs and you're like, that was nowhere near a 9. Match play, yeah, but you've done 2 kilometers today and haven't moved. But then again, that opens up further questioning. Why was that? Why is that so high? What is it? What's the heart rate like? How can we try and form a better picture of that player's perception of that session?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you do have. I've worked for a number of different managers, and each manager is completely different like a player. I mean, I've been to some clubs, and I don't want to name names, but I mean, I remember being out the side for a bit, and I was thinking I want to come in. So he would get us in every day, like religiously, even a Sunday for a cool down or come in. If you haven't played, you would normally expect to work really hard, but he'd come in and he'd just run through sort of like patterns of play and positional work. And you think you could, if you're at the team, you could go the whole week then without doing anything.
Yeah.
And then you sort of go 4 weeks down the line, then you've got, unless you're working on your own back, you've got zero chance of sort of making an impact in the team, because your fitness level is going to be miles behind the rest, the players that are actually playing. And then you look on top of that, and then that's when you've got to be educated in your fuel as well, because if you're not working at them loads and you're still piling your plate with what the players that are playing are eating, then you're going to gain excess body fat. And I mean, it's just a knock-on effect for everything. I mean, you really take each case as a sort of individual, and each manager and system as an individual approach. But I mean, you can't do that unless you educate the players as well.
No, and I think it's something I heard Liam Anderson at Crew talking about the other day, about the match day, the unused subs, or those that have played less than a certain amount, and how, I personally believe that post-match runs are just not worth it. you don't get nowadays. It's quite common for the groundsman to tell you to get off the pitch within. I've seen it at 5 minutes, and I've seen it being allowed for 20 minutes. So I think that match day +1 session is good. You'll get more out of it. But I also think that, and he spoke about muscle glycogen. So those players are prepared for a game they've not been involved in. So the nutritional periodization of that with the match day +1 players is also incredibly important, because they've not expended what they've probably prepared for. So how are you going to work that to their advantage as well?
I mean, I've seen the flip side of that, and I've seen the players that know they're going to be on the bench come Friday, and I've seen on their social medias they take a picture of his meal for the evening, and I've actually messaged him a few times saying, well, what are you going to do if you come on within the first 5 minutes, because you're not supplying yourself with sufficient fuel there. I would argue, have your carbs, and then, like you say, if you haven't used it, then go and do your sort of run match day +1 or match day +2 on the Monday morning, and make sure you sort of have a low carb, because you've already saturated your carb stores, and then go and work it off.
Yeah, do you know what? I was laughing there because I thought you were going to say on a Friday they come to the sports scientist. You know who I'm talking about here, where they say, "Can I do my runs now?"
Yeah, I know, but that's the funny side of it as well, because I mean, there's certain managers that you just, I suppose, as a player, you probably know that you're not going to come on, or certain positions. Say, I was a left back, so I knew that if I was out the team, likelihood is that they're not going to stick a left back on the bench, or that left back isn't coming on during the game, because I mean, you either bring on a centre half to score a goal, a winger or a midfielder to change the game, or a centre half to shut up shop and sort of protect the lead. So I mean, for a fullback to come on, so if I was on the bench knowing that I was on the bench, then would I really fuel for a game on the Friday? I mean, yeah, it's a tough one. I've seen loads of players do it though, and I've seen a lot of players as well getting sort of involved in this high fat, carbs are bad type thing. And I'm thinking, it's not what you want to be doing. But
no, it's interesting, and I think so. We were talking just before we came on here about CBD oil and an interview with Lauren Bannock and Graham Close, and Graham, while we know that there is some evidence to support CBD, for an athlete, a top level athlete, it's probably too risky to take it because we don't understand, how much THC is in that. They could fail a test. But what Graham was saying was that if a player is using it for recovery, then that gives you a little inroad into, okay, so they're using it for recovery. That player probably feels they're not recovered sufficiently after training and games. So how can we work with those players? And that's an interesting point, because when it comes to diets and these little things, players are human. They're gonna pick up on it, but it comes down to that fundamental understanding of what are the demands of the game, what are the demands of your position, and how are you going to fuel for that?
Yeah, I don't think enough is said on sort of positional work. And I mean, I think Mark Russell touched on it, and he talks about goalkeepers. And I mean, if you look at a goalkeeper Monday to Friday in training, they're working extremely hard. But come a game day, they're probably mostly sort of sedentary, apart from a few saves. I mean, if your team's on top, you might not see them the whole game. So, and then where do they load? Do they load from a Monday to Friday and sort of taper it off at the weekend, ready for the game, or do they do the opposite to the players? So
and I think your reserve goalkeepers, their highest load is the pre-match shots.
Yeah,
they're getting their highest load during that. And I've had some really good discussions with goalkeeping coaches about that, and about the guys. I think it's difficult. I know someone that's tried it as part of master's research, but it can be difficult to quantify what a goalkeeper's doing during the week. But their load is certainly, a player's match load will be higher, obviously, during the game. Their weekly loading will be higher for the games, but goalkeepers are the complete opposite. Again, another area that may have been neglected, and body composition for goalkeepers is arguably as well. It is as important, but again, an area that's not really looked into as far as I know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I mean, it can be ongoing though, can't it? I mean, you could sort of try and find out what players are doing once they finish training, and whether they're sedentary and just sitting in front of the PlayStation, or whether they're out and about with their families and stuff. And I mean, it could just escalate.
Yeah, there's so much that could be done, and there's also, I think, there's the other side of that is respecting actually the individual players' routines and how they are. You'll know as well that some continental players don't go to bed till 2:30 in the morning, but then they'll sleep in the afternoon. And if you were to look at that data and say, oh my God, you've only had 4 hours sleep, but you've come into training, and actually you find out, well, they have a siesta in the afternoon. So I think it's incredibly important to understand the position, but also understand that individual. And as we touched on at the start, the cultural needs and positional needs and beliefs of that player. And it's very complex, like individual sports are.
Yeah.
Quite easy to work in. Sorry if anyone works in an individual sport, but it is quite, compared to a team sport when you can have up to 30 odd individuals.
Especially from a nutritionist point of view, because I mean, like we said a bit earlier, there's not many full-time nutritionists out there. And if you coming in fortnightly and you've got a squad of 30 players, I don't really see what you're going to get through, what you're going to get across. I mean, going from previous experience, you see them to sort of get your body fats read, that is never really followed up unless you sort of, like we talked about earlier, in the fat club. And then you sort of have a talk around sort of winter time about immunity, and that's basically it. Well, from my experiences, that's basically it. And there's so much more that goes into it.
Yeah, and nutrition, everyone's got an opinion on, because everyone eats. So everybody seems to know what's right for them. And actually it takes a step back and more education for the players and the squad and the staff to understand these are the times during the week you should be doing this. It's no different to periodizing training. It's just an area that is probably becoming more prominent and we need to get better at. In football, but
I mean, we haven't said it, and being around a lot of players, I mean, a lot of them are really superstitious as well. So I mean, you try and change what they have before a game is going to go down like a lead balloon as well. So sort of got a lot of roadblocks.
And that's sometimes something that I've seen, that people making change just for change's sake. You can do that, but okay, but that person has a certain routine. That's the way they do things. They always do. I may disagree with it, but you've got to respect individual routines. I think there's the line, and are they crossing that line where it's going to be detrimental to performance? And they're balancing acts all the time that you have to make an informed decision on. And footballers, they don't like being told what to do all the time, and that's rightfully so. I think, you've got to pick your battles and try and understand that player a little bit more. And, there are, world-class players that have got to that level because of how they've used their routines and beliefs and superstitions. And you have to respect that. There's also some weird and wonderful things that you just you're like, shall I have a conversation, shall I not? What's going to happen here? But so I mean, it's been brilliant to chat to you today and get your insight, both as a nutritionist, but also as a player and your injuries. So what's the future holding for you now?
Future, I'd like to get back in football. Like I said, I'd love to work in a physio department, especially people that do have them big injuries, especially after an operation. I feel there's a big area that needs improving, say sort of post-operation hospital feeds, initially straight after the injury. So I'd love to get involved in that and just sort of help people to sort of come back and educate them as they go. Also, a big passion of mine is the sort of combat sports, and a big area where I think nutrition where nutritionist is vital. So I'd love to get involved in that side further down the line, and get involved in some weight cuts and manipulating the body composition in that sense.
That's a hugely interesting area, and I've followed some of the work on jockeys who were notorious. You could argue they're combat athletes, the amount of falls they take jockeys, but the same thing that, you know, in boxing and MMA, where those serious weight cuts can actually be really detrimental.
Yeah,
And it needs to be safe.
because I think jockeys as well, they don't even get the rehydration process after. They still have to weigh that same weight when they step onto the horse.
Yeah.
So if the big weight cut before, then they're going to be really struggling, sort of jumping on the horse and trying to concentrate. So
Yes, it's an interesting area, and I only probably about a year or so ago I started to become aware of that through some of Dan Martin and Graham Close doing that research, James Morton I think as well, and you're sort of looking at it going, I never really knew that. I just thought they won me old man a few quid.
yeah. I know, it is strange. Some of the weight cuts, I mean, you still see it now. You can go on YouTube and sort of look at some of the UFC fighters jumping in the hot baths and stuff. And I mean, Chris Cyborg, the woman fighter. I mean, you can go on YouTube and see some of her weight cuts, and it looks like torture. I mean, you actually think she was being tortured. Some of it, she's sort of laying on the floor screaming and crying, and you think, wow, what is this about? So. Yeah,
we moan about players not refueling.
I know, that's it. Yeah, so it's definitely a big interest and a big sort of area where nutrition is vital. So you can really sort of you can get involved and get sort of earn your money to speak. So yeah, it's a big passion of mine. I sort of love the sport. So.
That's brilliant, mate. No, it's been fantastic to talk to you today. If anyone needs to get hold of you or on social media, anything like that, where can they contact you?
I'm only on I'm only on Instagram, so it's just my name, Rhoys Wiggins. You can check me out on there. I sort of post a few football videos, some career highlights, not many, and then I do a few sort of low carb meals, high carb meals, and just try and show people the different sort of periodization on a day to day. So
I did look at some the other day, actually.
What's that? Sorry?
Saw some the other day. I was like, that looks good.
Yeah, so just playing around with a few bits and just show people that sort of you can do both sides of it. You can do high carb, low carb. You don't have to be in one sort of group. It's probably a better approach to fuel a session.
Yeah, it's just fueling for the demands of your sport, and they say all sports are different, and they have different ones. Even again, as we said earlier, positionally is another thing and a whole new argument. But listen, mate, thanks very much for that, and I really wish you all the best for the future and where you're going with your career. And I take a huge interest in it. It's good to see you doing so well, and after all the injury problems, and actually, having that passion to go on and study for a master's now. So
well, I'm hoping that sort of players as well, like from the football aspect, can sort of see me, especially on social media, and know that sort of people like yourself, there's a reason behind it. It's not just sort of willy-nilly, I'm just going to make you do it because I can. So hopefully I can bring the experience of play and now learning the other side of it. Hopefully I can bring the two together a bit more and try and sort of close the gap.
I think it's a great idea, mate. I think practitioners like myself and others, we need to get better at how we translate information, because taking the science is one thing, but actually getting it down to the ground level is arguably harder. And it's great to have guys like you around that who give advice like you've given today, who've actually experienced both sides of it, and that's invaluable for practitioners like myself and everyone else that they get to see your view of it, because sometimes we just become too caught up in things. We don't understand the players. Or we should understand the players better and their needs and demands. But thanks very much for doing this today, mate. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Cheers, mate.
No problem.